Welcome to Our Work with Pavan Sidhu, the podcast where we delve deep into the minds of leaders who are rewriting the rules and driving positive change, bringing you open conversations that offer wisdom and insights on the power of authenticity. Now here's your host, a seasoned executive on her own journey, Pavan.
Welcome back.
Hi, it's good to be back. This is a fun experience to do it conversationally with you.
Yeah. This will be the first one that I've recorded where there isn't like an objective. The first time we chatted, the objective was to kind of get a sense for me and the work that we do. Yeah. Or usually the goal is to like introduce a guest and their story. But so today, what I really wanted to chat about was, so as I was editing our episode and then listening back to it, I had this feeling of like, okay, so if we're saying authenticity is the way, and a lot of the way, not so much own like entrepreneurs and own businesses, like family owned or single person owned businesses, but certainly corporations, if we've gotten away from authenticity because of things like leadership training, the right way to behave, the optimal brand, et cetera, et cetera. So if we've gotten away from it in all of these environments, how do we get back to that place of authenticity? So that was one thing that came up for me. I was just going to share everything and then we'll just jump in wherever it makes sense to. So that was the first one. Like, how do we even start if this is a desire? The second thing, and this is like the 60-second clip of your why.
Oh, yeah.
Which got reviewed and looked at so many times, so many views, but makes sense because I thought it was very powerful. What came up for me during that is like at any point in your journey as a leader, you can choose to do things differently or just get better, right? Yeah. Like that inner work that you referenced is really something that's available to you at any given point in time. Yeah. And it's also something that even if you think you're a great leader, you've had feedback that you're a great leader, you can still continue to do that work, right?
Absolutely.
And I do think that work starts with kind of authenticity and deconditioning all of that. So those were the first couple things that came up for me right away as I was editing, putting it out there. And then recently, now that it's out there, I've realized, and I didn't think about this, there are so many young people listening to this podcast.
Okay.
And I didn't expect that.
Really?
I was thinking like our age group.
Okay, but we are young people, right?
Yeah. So
younger people.
Younger. Like I'm talking like 20-year-olds. Yeah. And like at a young, he's a field, what is he? He's an engineer in one of our businesses out in Vancouver who I've never met before. So I'm assuming he saw it on LinkedIn or something like that. And he reached out and he said, as I'm working through the organization in these various roles, like what are some things I need to know about leadership? What was your journey like? Like what are some things that worked for you, didn't work for you? Can you share that? And the first thing I thought when I read his message is authenticity. You have to hang on to your authenticity through the journey, right? Yeah. So anyway, so those are the few things that came up for me and why I thought I got to sit down with Suzanne again and talk through this.
Okay. Oh, I love that. I love that there's younger people and a diverse audience that you didn't expect. I mean, that's kind of exciting, a little overwhelming, but so important too, because one of the things I was thinking of as we talking about authenticity again is it's kind of a new thing. Like I love authenticity. I think it's a core concept of feeling good in your life. And I also recognize that it is hard work. It is fundamentally challenging to figure out who you are authentically and how you want to show up with that knowledge. So it's hard work. And I think having someone who's in their 20s starting to think about that is a really important piece because as you mentioned, part of being authentic is deconditioning. Well, we've got a little bit longer of conditioning to get rid of. So that's a lot of work for us to start this conversation at a later age, but to start it when you're 20 and maybe still able to experiment, like that's really powerful. So authenticity, I think, is a little bit of a double-edged sword that way. I think it is more or less available to everybody. I think it is something that we are privileged to be able to explore because, of course, like if you don't have your basic needs met, you're not really worried about self-actualization. But I think that in the business world today, it's available to everybody to start feeling like they can show up in a way that feels really good for them and in a way that feels really empowering for them. So you know, like you're on this journey, I'm on this journey of finding authenticity. What's been the challenging part of it for you?
So I would say since about 2018, 2019, because like that was really when it started to me. So about 5 years. And
Same
at
for
that
me.
point, yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
That makes sense too, right?
Exactly.
So around that time, I started to kind of focus less on the external and more on the internal. And I don't know that there was necessarily a catalyst for that. Maybe it was just time.
Yeah.
But again, like that's also when from a external career perspective, things had started to stabilize, right? So at that time, I think what I started with is just noticing and paying attention and thinking about things differently. Going through a day and figuring out like what parts do I not really like? What parts do I like? What parts did I feel very excited about? What are the parts of my job that really feel like work? What are my relationships that really just feel like work? And I'm like, when they reach out or I reach out, like it's something that I'm like, okay, yeah, maybe I should have coffee with this person. I should see this person, but I'm not really excited about it for some other reason. And at that point, like there's always like those Instagram trends that you see. And I think at that point, it was that whole like, are you energized by an experience or are you drained by an experience, right? So when I started, it was really as simple as just paying attention and starting to like put the pieces together.
Yeah.
So that was kind of how it started for me. Where I'm at now, that now is the tough part. Now where I feel like I've stripped away like the easy, like the low-lying fruit. I've stripped away like the BS, the relationships maybe that weren't aligned for me or that I outgrew. As I made a lot of those changes, now I'm left with something that I'm like, okay, like this mostly feels good most of the time. But in terms of like figuring out who I am in a very like authentic way. Like I don't really know necessarily where to start today now that I've taken care of all of like the easier situations that were easy to identify. Now it's the stuff that's tough. Now it's the stuff is like, well, I do enjoy that sometimes. It does make sense for me sometimes, but like, was that just the way that I was raised or I've done it so much that I'm good at it. So therefore it feels like it's authentically me, but it's not. Now is the tough part.
Yeah. And that makes sense. And I feel like that's really common with a lot of the people I talk to, whether it's clients, friends, or my peer group. There's this kind of aura of authenticity. Not that it needs to be easy, but it needs to be some sort of end goal in and of itself. And I think that is also something that could set everybody up for struggle. Like, I think the beautiful thing about the human experience, living this life, is that we're constantly evolving and changing. A friend of mine actually sent me a post the other day saying, like, what if it's not about life purpose? What if it's about like what gives me purpose and meaning right now? So I think the thing about authenticity is people maybe get the sense that it's some end goal that you're trying to achieve. And that really puts a lot of pressure on you to get it right, to figure it out, to be 100% authentic all the time. And that's just probably impossible. And it's not even embracing the beauty and the messiness of being a human. So authenticity, I think, is a journey, not a destination. And so part of the struggle, I feel, is putting it on ourselves as a new expectation. Because, you know, we have lots of things to do. And you said the word should, right? Like that's the classic thing. Like you don't want to should all over your life. Yeah. So is it, I should be authentic and I should be authentic in this way or that way? It's really a beautiful experimentation phase of figuring out like what feels good for me right now in this particular situation with this particular, you know, context. How do I feel like I gave it my all or I felt true to myself? And yeah, I think we can put too much pressure on finding some sort of bullseye authenticity.
Yeah. And I also think like what you're talking about now is where people are actively seeking their passion or trying to figure it all out actively. That is the extreme. Yeah. I think I've started to like pick this up now as I'm editing all of the conversations I had over this last winter is like even Todd, he talked about actually having a conversation. He was working at Nutrien, and then was let go and prior to that, to being let go, he had reached out to somebody at Hatch, or there was some type of connection between him and Hatch, and they had kind of had a conversation about a potential role for him, right? So I think like that's I don't think I'm making some assumptions here, but I don't think Todd in that moment when he had that conversation with Hatch would have been like, well, I'm trying to seek a place where I can be an authentic leader.
Yeah.
But there was something about his environment that was whispering to him to like, hey, this might not be your space.
Yeah.
Go have this conversation, right? And I think that's where most people experience it, is like that internal need.
Yeah.
And the way I described it was like, I knew I either needed to change the way that I'm showing up, I needed to change my environment or the work that I do, et cetera, et cetera. I think 99% of people that are feeling this, that are on the journey to authenticity wouldn't describe it that way. They wouldn't describe it as I'm looking to become more authentic or I'm looking to find my passion. They would describe it as there's this, and usually it's an external catalyst.
Yeah.
There's this thing that I need to resolve, right? And I think the vast majority of people, that's what they're looking for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that speaks to what a lot of clients come to me for. Like they'll say, okay, you know what? There's something off or something missing. And there's no concept of what it is or exactly what might be the fix. And, you know, authenticity comes up in every way, because I would say there are clients that come to me. I've had a lot of male clients come with some very specific action-oriented goals. Like, okay, I'm starting a new job. I want to be a good leader in this environment and whatever. And the question always goes back, well, what does a good leader mean to you? So that's a concept of authenticity, right? It has to be your driven answer that gets you there. But there's always this like, oh, there's a minute of, okay, I came to you with something, whether it's, oh, I feel off, or, oh, I want to do well in this new job, or, oh, I've got, you know, certain goals I want to meet. And then you turn the question back and say, okay, well, what does this goal give you? Or what's the motivator for you? And all of a sudden there's a little bit of crickets and they haven't thought about it.
No.
And I think that's what you're talking about, is like the larger percentage of people who haven't turned their mind exactly to what it is that feels off.
Yeah.
But they want to figure out why it feels off.
Yeah. I think all of us, certainly in corporate environments, there is, so I think about this young man in his corporate journey as he works up through this organization. And I think that for him, this conversation, like it's something he should be aware of and be in the know, but so much of his path for the next 10 to 15 years is going to become about external mastery, right? It's about whatever skill he needs to learn, whether that's project management, it's more of a commercial sales type role or a production role, whatever that role is. He has to look to others to figure out those skills and things like that. Yeah. And through that process, he's going to naturally be conditioned to figure out the right way to do it, the right way to present yourself, because that's just part of like the looking to the external to learn and grow and develop. I hope what he would do, and this is the advice I'd give someone as they're moving up through an organization or they're starting their career, is don't give your power away to other people.
Yes.
So you're looking at your leader, your mentor, to learn a technical skill, a soft skill, learn how to handle situations, how to handle people, how to handle conflict. Like that's what you should be doing at that point in time. But when they come back, even like if it's your dream mentor who's doing your dream job that you hope to do one day, if they say to you, well, this doesn't matter, or that doesn't matter, and right away your spidey sense is like, that doesn't really resonate with me. But if there's like typically what we say, oh, that doesn't really resonate with me, this decision this leader's making doesn't really make sense to me, but like they obviously know better than me, so that must be the right answer.
Yes.
Eliminate that.
Yes.
Eliminate it must be the right answer because they know better than me. It very likely is that your style's different and you would have made a different decision. And because of that, you would have had a different outcome. Yeah. And there's no right or wrong, but that's like your authentic way of being.
Yes. Oh, I love that you brought that up. And actually it's funny because it's a very related conversation, but it's a little tangential. But like that whole piece of outsourcing our authority is a huge problem. Like it is a huge, and we do this all the time, like collectively in this kind of North American culture. There's always someone, there's a guru, there's a coach, there's a, CEO, a mentor, whatever, that has the answer of how our lives can be better.
Yeah. Or an Instagram influencer.
Right? Totally. And so it is a challenge because we have so many external influences now. Like social media has given everybody a voice, and that's great. Like it's great, but also it should not then take over or supplement or like take over your voice. 'Cause
Override.
you're overriding your voice. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you know, I'm going to give you a funny example because it's so pertinent in everything we do that it is a collective issue. So one of the other things I do is governance consulting, right? Which is not really overly about the individual. I love this example for how it demonstrates how scary it is to take ownership of your own stuff, because I've worked a lot with regulatory bodies. So these are bodies that come in and tell other people how to do things, to make sure things are done correctly and compliance. It's a very typically black and white world. And one of the things that some of the regulatory bodies are doing now is they go and they shift from a very black and white checklist prescriptive way of saying, okay, if like, say, for example, like financial institutions are told how to do things correctly. They used to have a checklist. Okay, if you do all of these things, then we as the regulatory body know you're doing things correctly.
Right.
That's been around for a really long time. There's been a shift, especially in Canada now, of shifting to what's called a principles-based regulatory approach. That means that you are given ideal outcomes. Like, okay, we want you to have good governance, for example. We're not going to tell you what that exactly means. We're not going to tell you how to do good governance. You, as an entity, have to figure that out for yourself. Wow, that should give you so much freedom, exciting innovation, creativity. You can find your own path. No, people are freaking out. They're like, please just tell us what to do. We don't want to have creativity. We don't want to have innovation. We want you to tell us what to do. And that is something that I think is a big problem. Like having your authority outsourced to somebody else, just letting go of the choices, letting go of the thinking process, and just defaulting to somebody else has made finding authenticity very challenging because it's not our natural way of being at this point.
Yep.
And I think it's an opportunity, but it's very scary. It's very scary to say, okay, if I'm going to blaze my own trail, I get to decide what that trail looks like. Ugh, then you have all of a sudden, okay, someone else might not like my trail. My trail might run over someone else. I might end up going and getting lost on my trail. Like, I don't like that. This is scary. So I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to hide in my little bucket. I will wait for someone to tell me what to do, or I'll pretend I'm doing these things, but I'm going to only do them when everyone tells me what authenticity should look like.
Yeah.
So it's a great combination of things that we have to kind of overcome right now, is finding our internal kind of way of being, like our internal compass.
Yes.
And then allowing that to guide how we show up authentically.
And like, I can think of so many examples of this, right? Where we're given these black and white policies that are meant to mitigate risk or define a process.
Yes.
And like the larger the organization, likely the more of these you're going to have because there's just more.
For every situation.
Yeah, exactly. So one that keeps coming up. And it's so in safety sensitive environments, you do post-incident drug testing.
Yep.
So, you know, property damage, injury, whatever it might be, you do a test, right? Mm-hmm. So the way that I perceive this is the intention of this policy is just to ensure that someone's not impaired as a root cause of an incident.
Of course.
But the way the policies are written in most organizations or industrial environments is like, no, you test everybody all the time, which there's an equity thing for that, for sure. I get that, right? But it takes away the like, do we think that there was a risk associated with impairment here? Mm-hmm. Or are we just ruling it out for the sake of ruling it out in every single case? So that's just like one example of like,
you could find a million in the black and white. It feels better and more safe to just pick something and just be very strict about it instead of understanding the principles behind it, or like, what's the rationale, or how do we make this work for us?
Right.
Yeah. And that's fair. Like big organizations, they have to do that. And I get that. I really do. I just think it's filtered into so many areas of our life beyond, you know, like policies at work, and finding that it's like everything we want to do now needs to have guidance and someone telling us what to do.
Yeah. Yeah. you talked about this, right? Like there's a lot of people right now that are just trying to survive, and they need the job that they're doing, and they just really need to get through a day of parenting and the job that is not aligned at all for them.
Yeah.
And they just need to survive. So like, I just want to acknowledge that. I will say though, if you're not in that situation and you've got some wiggle room, there is a lot to be said about alignment in the actual role that you're in. You're going to be you're going to have more of an impact and be more effective if you're in a position or a company or an environment that aligns with who you are, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, and like, for example, I was an accountant, an analyst, a controller type role was my last role before I moved into operations. I was like a mediocre accountant as far as I'm concerned, right? Yeah. Like it got the job done. For some reason, people kept promoting me, but I thought I was like mediocre at best. Like I wasn't adding value to the bottom line. I wasn't really I didn't feel like I was doing very meaningful work and had much of an impact, right? But I felt like that shifted as soon as I moved into an operations or leadership type environment, because it aligned a little bit with who I am. So I think there's also so many people that are in the wrong role.
Yeah.
And way that it shows up quite a bit is, and Todd talked a little bit about this as well. He's like, so if you become a really good technical project manager, a really good field engineer, a really good whatever, like whatever the path is, there is some technical mastery. Yeah. There's some mastery of some position along the way in your career that's going to allow you to move up into like more senior roles. Some people are put on that path because they think it's the right thing to do. Advancement is positive, more money, more stature, all that type of stuff. Some people are put on that path to leadership are never meant to be leaders. So I think like the first step you got to ask yourself, maybe your journey isn't to become a more authentic leader. Maybe your journey is not to be in a leadership role, right? Like I think that whether it's leadership, whatever it is, you got to ask yourself, is this role correct for you? If 80-90% of it feels like work, you're never going to be really great or make an impact on it, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I like that. You know, what's interesting about that is as soon as you said that last piece, my head went to, what is your definition of success? Because the way you're describing it, like you did say, like, oh, this is the path, you know, promotion is good, more money is good, leadership is good. We all have been taught that that's true. And I don't think it is true for everybody. So have you defined even in your 20s in a corporate role, like this field engineer you're talking about, like, does he know what success looks like for him? Like, what would I describe my successful life to be like? Like my successful life is changing rapidly every day almost, which is tough to nail down, but like it will change over time. But is that path something of interest? And if so, keep chasing it. What do you need to do to follow that leadership kind of trajectory? Or if not, if it's like, but I really love the technical stuff, I want to get better at the technical stuff, then maybe that's what success looks like. Oh, I really love doing what I do every single day. And I don't think we question that enough. Like you had said, I think people just think they're supposed to move into leadership. Like everybody in an organization cannot be in a leadership role in the future, you know, right? Usually you got the hierarchy that's pretty narrow at the top and bigger at the bottom. So some of us won't be leaders, and that has to be at some point considered okay. Yep. But I don't know if we've all asked ourselves that individual question, like, am I going to be okay not being a leader in this company, being really good at XYZ, whatever it is I do, or being the best, you know, middle manager I can be because I want to navigate that with certain people? I don't know if we ask those questions. You know, have we made that the only definition of success is getting up the corporate ladder?
So let's say you're not in that survival mode and you've got some wiggle room to play with. You are now in a role that you think is aligned with you. Yeah. How do you step into more authenticity in the space that you're in now?
I think it does go back to, well, always to me, it goes back to looking inward and figuring out like, what are my motivators? What are my values? Right. What are the things, like you said before, what are the things that light me up? In any given role, you can decide for yourself. Do I love having flexibility at work? Do I really feel like I need to have external validation, which is a genuine value for some people. And I think if you need external validation, you should go get it. I don't feel like I think sometimes we worry a lot about it being a bad thing, but it's not always. Do you need a certain income to feel good? I mean, again, valid if you do, but we don't ask the questions. So you can't really shape the life of your dreams unless you start asking the questions of what those dreams look like.
Yeah. And I think the other thing too is, and again, this is a privilege because you have to be at a particular level of an organization before you can do this thing I'm going to tell you to do. But I think also looking at your position and the parts that are not aligned for you, meaning the parts that you don't maybe add a lot of value in, or is not where you flow, is not the expertise that you have. Can you find a way to like delegate or outsource those pieces out? And so, for example, and again, this goes back to like, as you move up through an organization, unless it's a heavily technical space, I think that might be the one exception, but I would say you become more and more a generalist.
Yeah.
Right? Like whatever your skill that brought you to get promoted is not the thing that you're going to be spending the vast majority of your time doing anymore. Like general managers, I think most C-suite executives, unless like you're like the
Super niche.
C-suite, like the legal expert or the, right? Like there's certain technical pieces to a lot of those things. But like if you're overseeing operations, you're over a CEO and you're overseeing a company, a VP of a geographical region, like those types of positions, we're all generalists.
Yeah.
We're not really well, I'm sure we're experts in one or two things, but the day-to-day is a little bit of everything.
Yeah.
A little bit of leadership, a little bit of strategy, a little bit of financial stuff, a little bit of team building. Like there's a little bit of everything. So like, for example, so going back now to 2018, 2019, I, as a GM, so I'm a business person. Like my skills are in strategy, finance, leadership, building teams, like those types of things, right? I run an operation, but I'm a fairly weak operational GM, I would say. A lot of my peers are more operational in some cases, and some of them are just like me, more business people. So we have a little bit of everything like that. So one of the things that always used to fall on my plate when I got the role and did it for the first few years is making these big like maintenance decisions around equipment and plant and stuff like that. And we made those decisions in conjunction with a lot of people, but it's not like, unless I was going to go become a mechanic or work in a plant for 10 years, I was never going to get the level of mastery or information or foundation I needed in that topic to be able to make really good decisions in that area. And at that time, so what we did is like, we created a new position called a maintenance manager, brought in a gentleman who does a fantastic job of not just making those decisions, but we added a bunch of other things to the role to make it a full role, right? So I felt like taking that piece off and being able to bring somebody onto my team that shored up that weakness that I had added so much value. And he's aligned in that decision making. I'm sure he would never want my job the rest of it. And I would
Exactly.
right? Like, so it's like, if you have power, or if you have the ability to have these conversations with your leadership to say like, there's these parts of my job, like versus just like putting your head down and trying to get it done, knowing that you're not going to add a lot of value. Not always possible. There's budget constraints and things like that. But I do think that part's important as well.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you're telling that story, what I'm hearing you describe is like you owned your own strengths and gifts and said, these are the things that I'm really good at. And it's totally okay not to be good at these other things because someone else is really good at those other things. And that's a piece of authenticity at work that I think is really hard, because being authentic is knowing where your limits are. And I think it's really great, especially with leaders, because they're going to have a big impact. But at any level, is saying, look, I'm really good at these things. Depending on your job, are you interested in kind of flexing a new muscle and learning new skills? Or is it more important for you to really anchor the skills you've already got, hone them really closely, and then also find ways to delegate or find ways to bring in support? I mean, that's a decision right there. And like you said, it's easier the higher you go, you get to ask for delegation or support. But what a great experience to say, yeah, I know what I'm good at, and I'm not going to pretend I'm good at the other stuff. Because I think when we are working through corporations inauthentically and being driven by external forces more than knowing our own selves, we are feeling like we have to do it all. And that's a recipe for disaster, because nobody can. It's impossible. Nobody can be amazing at every single thing. And that doesn't do doesn't do justice to the organization's needs either. You can't just fluff your way through really important pieces like the operations aspect that you said you're a little weaker on.
Yeah, for sure. And like, so I'm telling the end of the story. The part of the story I'm not telling is for the first few years, I was embarrassed and had shame because I felt like, oh, if I'm going to be a GM, I need to figure this stuff out.
Yeah.
So I was banging my head against a wall trying to figure it out. I think just, owning the fact that this is not my thing, like you said, that's when things shifted. And as an organization, I think we're better because of having this gentleman run our maintenance for the whole province.
So what got you past the shame and the embarrassment to get to the point where you thought, you know what, this is not my area. I can't keep smashing my head on the wall.
The thing that got me to let go of the shame and the embarrassment is I realized that I'm a really good business person. So I felt like when I first got the role, everything's new and you're trying to figure it out. But I felt like the more that I was like knocking parts of my role out in my job empowered me to acknowledge and address the parts I was weak at.
Yeah, I love that.
And seeing that in my peers as well too, like versus again, putting all the other GMs on a pedestal, realizing like, hey, this guy's really good at this. Like everybody, once I had a good, sober, honest look around and realized everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, and me being a weak operational leader doesn't make me any less effective of a GM. I was like, oh, I can do this.
Yeah. I love that. I've had a lot of those conversations lately with clients too, like looking outside of yourself and going, okay, I feel like I'm supposed to be, or I should be more strategic, or, you know, my peers are all preoccupied with mergers and acquisitions and like, what are the businesses we should be snapping up right now? And like, I don't know how to do that. You might not be meant to do that, right? You might be meant to bring in a different voice or bring in a different skill set. And it's not until we really get validated on how we're good at certain things that we let go of the fact that we're not good at other things. And I think that's a really important first, maybe not the first step, but it's an important part of the authenticity journey is going, okay, where am I excited? Where am I strong? Where do I feel really good spending my time? And like you said, where am I not so good? And owning that and understanding, okay, now I need to problem solve around that kind of where am I not so good? And there's lots of ways, right? Getting better at it, skills, training, development, deciding for yourself if that's an important skill, or delegating or getting support. That's a part of how organizations get stronger. Individuals feel better in their day-to-day. They feel more connected to their organization when that's allowed, when you're allowed to be uniquely you and not somebody else. And we're getting there. I think it's happening. The conversations are. I don't know if we're all the way there yet, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the other thing too is like representation, right? If you're the only woman leader at a table, like you instantly have a different view of like measuring up. You're looking at measuring up to your peers in a different way because you're innately different.
Yes. And that's the piece that is so hard in a conversation because the differences are what makes a woman leader value add. It is uniquely, like we don't need a bunch more accountants, no offense, lawyers, no offense. We don't need 8 of those at the board table. We don't need 8 of those at the leadership table. We need diversity. We need a bunch of different perspectives. We need people who care about people.
Yeah.
We need people who worry about culture. We need people who worry about the employees and their, you know, like employee turnover and whether or not employees are feeling validated and comfortable. We need people who care about, you know, the image and the longevity of the organization. Like there's so many different components. Not everybody has the same view, and that's perfect.
Yeah.
That's important that not everybody has the same view. Otherwise, what's the point of having more than one?
So just, I want to just summarize a lot of what we've said. So we've said, don't give away your authority.
No.
Tap into yourself and know what you think and what you feel. And you do have to carve out time for that.
Yeah.
Like especially as you move up and your calendar gets fuller, like as much as you make time to reach out to a mentor or sponsor and book in coffees or check-ins with them or check-ins with your boss, it should be like that formal of a process where you're setting aside time in your calendar to check in with what you think, what you need, what you want, what you think the next step is for your team, your organization, for your work.
Yeah.
So I think just like getting really clear about having time and space for that is really, really important. We talked about alignment in your role. Is it where you need to be? Is it the thing that lights you up, or is it what you need to get through the day? Which again, like that
Also
is the
fair.
reality for so many people. And there's a lot of privilege to be able to even think about these things.
Yeah. I really love the formality that you're describing too. Like, and this is hard. Again, it's super hard, especially as a young person in bigger corporations or in starting out in work. It's very hard to think that you own your path. It's really easy to be like, okay, well, when my boss wants to talk to me for performance reviews, they'll check in. Super hard to do it the other way and say, look, I'm really curious. And there are people, like I think I was kind of a keener, but there's a lot of people who don't feel comfortable shaping their own path. But saying to your boss, okay, I'd really like to know more, or what else touches my job? Like, what are the other pieces that I'm going to see in the future? What do you see as my gifts? Here's what I see as my gifts. Here's what I want to do more of because this feels really good. But like making it a formal thing, a time selected in the calendar meeting would be so good if everybody did that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, can you imagine? I mean, yeah, the bosses would be busy talking to their employees, but I think that's actually really necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important. But I'm also even just referring to like time to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like I remember somebody reached out to me last year and she was about to take on what she felt was a stretch role similar to what I had when I moved from finance into ops. And she said, like, looking back on it, what would you have done differently? And that's what I said to her. I said, I spent so much time talking to the experts on the union, the experts on the trucks and the plant and the mix and like all that kind of stuff. I spent so much time reaching out to everybody external that there was no time left in my calendar literally to have a half hour to like process what had happened throughout the day and what I thought about it. Like, so in addition to like sitting down with your leader, I think sitting down with yourself and having time to like literally process and think through and figure out like what you think, because like literally as you move up and this is your calendar becomes so ridiculous.
Yep. I've worked in corporations where I was supporting various leaders who had those crazy calendars, and my calendar was usually okay, mostly. But you know, even getting leaders to take a pause, even just at the end of the day, to even just reflect on either what happened that past week or looking forward to what's happening the next week, understanding what does my next week look like, or next day, however frequently you do it. What do I need to feel good about that week, feel supported that I can do this, all the work that's in front of me well.
Yeah.
We don't take the time. And that's, you know, it's funny, people, you know, we've chatted about like the spiritual world and people talking about woke and stuff. Waking up is really just actually paying attention. Being mindful and being intentional and being kind of on top of your own life. Like that's all you really need to do. There's no magic to it. But sometimes we get stuck thinking like, well, I don't have enough time, or I can't possibly, or I don't have the capacity, or okay, that's fine. But you realize that you're going to feel that way kind of continuously forever if you don't take the time.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's it. Like that is the first step to authenticity is
Mindful, intentional,
pay attention, create space, be on top of your life.
Yeah. Check in with yourself more than you check in with anyone else.
Yeah. 100%. 100%. Yeah.
It's really that simple. It's like, okay, are you checking in with how you feel about what you're thinking, what your needs are, what your values are, your motivators are? Do you have that sense more anchored into you than the external?
Yeah.
And that's a hard place to, and again, allow it to change. And say no.
Yeah. If you can. If you're in a situation where you can say no to the meeting, say no to the committee, say no to the person.
Yeah.
Do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that will create space for other things that are more authentic to you, where you'll have more of an impact and add more value.
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny, I'm thinking about the pendulum again, because as you start your journey, you never say no. As you swing really far, on the other hand, the other way, you say no with no context, no answer, and no concern. And then once you get to the middle, it's like, okay, that doesn't work for me, but what about this?
Yeah.
Can that work for you? Right? You just come to a place of understanding that your authentic self is going to bump up against someone else's authentic self, and you have to find ways to work together.
Yeah.
I would say, starting is probably the hardest part, because it is finding, like we talked a lot about conditioning and external influences, but they are so prevalent and incessant. Like we'll never get rid of external influences. So it's about recognizing, and again, being intentional and mindful and understanding, okay, I've heard this opinion, this view, this value. I'm going to sit with it, see if it clicks with me, if it doesn't click with me, and then making a decision on your own. But at the very beginning, I think it's really just, where do you start? Like I always start with values. I like to start with values, with people, with clients, to understand that is very important. It does lead into like what motivates me then. And then what does life look like? Like what does a good life look like in this moment, at this time we're talking? What does a good life look like? And it's a multiple conversation. It's not a one and done thing. You have to dig through a lot of layers, and sometimes you do need support. Like, I mean, obviously I'm a coach, so I support a lot of people through this. You can work through it with your friends, but they have certain ideas of what they want for you. It's really hard with spouses because, of course, your lives are like, it's really hard to figure out your authentic self with your spouse. But finding those ways of exploring, whether it's journaling, working with a coach, working with some other externals, to help you probe deeper into what it is that feels authentic for me.
Right.
I think that's a big piece of it.
Getting some support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were some of the things you did when you were on your early stages of considering your authentic self?
It was paying attention, saying no, cutting things out, redirecting, delegating.
Yeah.
It was really that journey. Mm-hmm. And now it's more like, okay, now I feel, and I think I said this to you when at the beginning of our last coaching session, is I do feel like I've got a bit of a blank canvas. Now it's like defining. So now that I've like cut the fat, for lack of a better term, and kind of have figured out some alignment and kind of at least I feel like I've refined my compass. Like now I can be put into a situation and really figure it out. Yeah. But now as I'm creating the next phase, or like to have this blank canvas in front of me, like that's where I'm struggling right now, is like, how do I begin to create it? Yeah. And the values, that's a good one.
Yeah. I find sometimes it's kind of that inventory too. Lots of times we'll go through exercises. I've done this myself. What is it that what are the pieces of my day, my work, my partnerships, my, hobbies? What are the things that are genuinely feeling good most of the time? And what are the things that genuinely feel exhausting or draining or unfulfilling most of the time? I mean, there are things that'll probably, like, even in things you love to do, there'll be days that are hard.
Totally.
And even in things that are hard, there can be moments of hope or glimmer, right? So finding out, what do I want to do more of? What do I want to do less of?
Yeah.
And if you are in the world with other people around you, like, how does that impact them? Like, how will me chasing my authentic self impact my spouse, my children, my company? Like, those are valid considerations. You don't just defer to the answers. You don't just defer to the impacts of them and say, okay, well, then I better not be authentic. But it's something that does have to logically, pragmatically be considered.
Yeah.
So those are some good steps.
Yeah, no, I think that's it. Like, I really just wanted to kind of explore it in a different way. Cause like, just to say like, hey, you need authenticity. Yeah. Go be authentic, because authenticity is the thing that's going to make you successful. Yeah. And then not to really give any packaging around it. Yeah. I thought was like, okay, And again, like I'm on my journey. Yeah. You coach through this, right? Yeah. So like you have a lot more mastery around the topic than I think most people. Yeah. So I just wanted to give some people that, like, because based on the response from our comments in the first podcast, a lot of people are starting there. Things externally aren't feeling good. Yeah. There's a whisper that they need to change themselves or the environment. They need to change their perception of something, or they need to be grateful for something, or like that's what people are experiencing. Yeah. So I just wanted to give it some context.
Maybe one thing we didn't talk about really enough is like, why is authenticity important? Because it's hard to see how it's the magic path. But what I see when I see people who start to show up authentically is that everything feels a little bit better, right? And here's what I'm getting at. So when I see people who are struggling at work and feel crummy at work, they're often trying to be somebody else because that's the road to success they've been told is the right road. And feeling crummy in that path in your work is a sign that you're doing it someone else's way. Because once you start to recognize your authentic gifts and go, okay, well, I want to do more of that. Like, just like you were saying, you felt like you were smashing your head on the wall when you were trying to be excellent at ops. It wasn't your natural gift. And so it was a struggle. That environment felt like work and felt hard. When you recognized I'm authentically more inclined and more gifted in these other areas, you do more of those things. Life kind of rolls out nicely in front of you. It's the friction. It's the offness. It's the feeling disconnected from yourself in work or whatever you're doing. It's that first signal that you are not operating in your natural way or rhythm or authentic style. You are operating in a way that somebody else told you was correct, and it feels crummy. So it's that first crummy feeling that's the signal. From there, as you start to let go of the things that aren't yours and you start to kind of allow the path of success to roll out in front of you more naturally, then it feels smoother. It feels more effortless because you're doing what you're naturally good at. You're naturally enjoying. Everything just feels better.
So let me ask you this, because this is something that I struggle to differentiate sometimes. I felt a lot of friction when I started to do early morning workouts, but I do love to work out, and my life schedule became unmanaged. Like it was hard to get the workouts in unless I was doing them early morning. So there's so much friction around that, but it was like something I really wanted and needed, or so I felt. Even around this podcast, right? Like I intentionally wanted to create some friction in my life to learn and grow and develop something new because I felt like I was getting into that comfort trap thing. So how do you differentiate between friction that is going to grow and develop you and stretch you versus friction, get the hell out of here?
Okay, well, I'll give you two examples. Well, not two examples, one analogy, because this is what I think about all the time. And this is exactly related to physicality. There is a very big difference in how your body and your muscles feel after working out than how they feel if you hurt yourself. You can have muscle pain from injury. You can have muscle pain from I've worked that muscle and it is tired and it is sore and it is happy. So I think there's a very big difference, and it could actually be a physical feeling. You know, like the exhaustion of a fulfilling day is different than an exhaustion of a really depressing and sad day, right? Like you still feel a certain way, but the energy behind it and the way you kind of embrace it is very different. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's not necessarily the friction that you're feeling as you're approaching it. It's how you feel after the fact. Yeah. Okay.
And it's not like a frictionless, and maybe that was the wrong word to use. Authenticity does not mean no bumps. Authenticity does not mean no work. It just means like what you're doing feels good and continues to compel you forward. Yeah. So like when you're working out in the morning, and God love you because I cannot do that. If you were to get up in the morning and you go, oh, I don't want to get up, but you go to the gym and you feel good at the end, and then you go, okay, it's going to be hard again tomorrow, but I want to do it. Yeah. That's a different kind of friction. Totally. That's a motivating kind of, I have a goal and this is how I'm going to feel my best kind of friction. Okay.
No, that's a good differentiator because like I've thought about that. And even like when I started with this, like there was some days where it's like, what am I doing? Like, why do I think this is a good idea for me? Because this is freaking hard. Yeah. Like it felt hard to figure out the technology. It felt hard to reach out to people. It felt hard to have the conversation. Everything just felt hard. Yeah. And some days still does. But like, I got so much fulfillment and joy out of it. And like it was the hard that wanted me to come back the next day. Yeah. It was like, okay, like that conversation didn't go the way I wanted to. How do I make sure that the next one does? Right.
And so it motivates you in a way.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good differentiator. Yeah.
And unfortunately, I know that because I feel the pain of getting old. And then I'm like, okay, I should start working out because I like that pain better.
Yeah.
It's a definitely different feeling.
Talk to or listen to the episode with Marie.
Yeah.
That'll be a good one.
I know. I look forward to that because it is a whole thing. And that's another thing too that we haven't talked about in relation to authenticity. I think, this is my personal opinion, and I think you and I have talked about this, authenticity is identified in a very physical way. It is not a mental exercise. It is a full body exercise. Like, we are not enough in touch with our bodies because they have so much wisdom to give us. And I think we will, when we start to listen to our bodies and how are we, like we've mentioned this kind of without being this explicit throughout the podcast today, is like when you feel good. We're not saying when you think you're good, when you feel good. When you feel good at the end of your workday, when you feel good relating to your peers and your coworkers, when you feel like the work is meaningful, that word is very intentional. It is a body response. It's like I feel more energized or I feel more drained.
Yes.
Or I feel more physically open and expanded in this world, or do I feel tension and stress and achiness in my body? Like, those physical feelings will help you guide the way. You don't need to do it through your brain.
Yeah. In fact, your brain can be misleading.
Completely misleading. That's where all the external stuff is. Your body doesn't have the external stuff. The brain has the external stuff, the other voices, the social media influencers, the education system, the parents that told you what you're supposed to be when you grow up. Like, that's where that lives, is in your brain.
Yeah. Not so much your body.
Not your body. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really important. I like one thing that I wish I would have been more in touch with, obviously, like always, but certainly when I was dating. Because when you think back to like your
red flags.
Yeah.
That's a physical response. It's a red flag.
Exactly. Like when you think about when your body's reaction to other people is the most important is when you're picking the person you're going to like ride through life with. Yeah. And that's a very important thing that I did not learn till way too late in my life.
I know. And the thing now too is like, and you and I were talking about this before we started recording, is like kids.
Yeah.
Kids are not full in their brains yet of conditioning and other external factors. They are physically present in the moment and they just do whatever the heck feels good. Yeah. And we have lost that. And that is super important to living an authentic life, is embodying, like that childlike innocence, that childlike curiosity, that childlike, it's like, I do want to do things that feel good, bring me joy, bring me pleasure. That's what kids want. We know that. It's like, I would like to have McDonald's every day because it's delicious. Okay. The rational mind recognizes that's not long-term sustainable, but you let go of even wanting or even desiring the feel-good moments.
Totally. So we interviewed summer nannies last week.
Oh, okay.
And when the last one left, I turned to my daughter, my 3.5-year-old daughter, and said, Maya, which one do you like? And she said this one. And this is why. And Nick's like, we're letting her make the decision. I'm like, because she probably has the wisest gut. And she was just like so decisive about it. She didn't even have to think about it. Like, this is the person I want looking after me. Okay, cool. Yeah. That's the way we're going to go, right? Yeah. Try to get back to that place.
Yes. And when you think about it, like, that's not, and the reason Nick was like, what? Is because that's not how we were raised.
No.
We didn't have a say. Like, it's a new generation that's coming up ahead of us who hopefully will feel more authentic throughout their lives. Not just, I was an authentic child and then the world told me that wasn't good. And so I shifted and I changed. And now people like you and I are reflecting and going, okay, what parts of myself have I let go of because someone said it was too much or not enough or whatever?
Yeah.
For me, I've had this conversation with a few people about, it's a strange example, but how authenticity shifts over time. When I was younger, I colored my hair all the time. I love coloring my hair. I'm not going to argue with that. That's a fun thing. But when I was in my late teens, early 20s, it was like full crazy expression, right? Like, sometimes I did so many highlights, I almost looked blonde. Sometimes my hair was this burgundy reddish color, and like, I just played with it, right? I was just experimenting, and that's what life is like at that age. You just experiment. You just, do whatever feels fun in the moment. When I got to my late 20s, I guess it was my late 20s, I started to realize like there was this one color that just looked really good. And suddenly I decided, you know what, I'm just going to do that one color that feels like the best expression of my hair color. And yes, it's not exactly my natural color, a little darker, but I liked it. It looked good. It felt good. I got compliments. I let go of the experimentation phase. But now I'm at this other phase in life where it's like my hair's going gray. And I'm kind of curious about that. And so this is where I think I'm at, hopefully a little bit in that pendulum. The pendulum place of being in the middle is like, you know what? I don't feel like I have to color my hair if I don't want to. And I feel like if I do want to, I can. So for example, I was inspired by some influencers, a woman I met who are very young looking, but they've let their hair go gray and it's super gray. And I'm like, dang, that looks good. I'm excited about that. I'm excited about the idea of having my hair turn gray. And then I made a comment to somebody I know and they were like, well, just don't look like a hippie witch. And I thought, you know what? Actually, that's totally the look I'm going for is like, I want to embody that hippie witch gray hair.
Yeah.
And in this place of my life with authenticity, I can hear that sort of the judgment behind that. I can sort of recognize the little ugh in my stomach where I thought, is that what I'm going to look like? Is this bad? Is this like, have I lost my appeal as a 40-year-old woman who's now going to go gray? Like there was that moment. There was that external factor that hit me and influenced my thought process. And I thought, you know what? A, I'm going to try it. And B, if I don't like it, I'll color it back again, like whatever. And it's finding that flexibility in who you are authentically and allowing it to just be whatever you need it to be.
Yeah.
And so I always laugh that like my hair has been authentic, sometimes even before I felt like I was.
Like, I think that is so important. Like, I have so many examples of that. It's amazing how the environment that you're in or the time of life, like you're talking about the time of life that you were in, experimenting versus not. But I think it's just as true for environment, and the people you have around you will bring out different parts of you, which are not any less authentic.
Right.
They're just different parts of you, right?
Absolutely.
Like I remember, and she's like the sweetest, and she didn't mean the comment she made, my friend made to me right after Nick and I got married. She was like, why didn't Nick just did the speech?
Yeah.
I didn't do it. Yeah. And she's like, you always do the talking, right? Like you always, like you give the eulogies, like you do all the family stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, she's like, why didn't you do that?
Yeah.
Like, and like, there's a little bit of judgment there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of curiosity and a little bit of judgment there. And it did kind of like, oh, like, have I in this relationship, like completely given my power away? Cause I don't make decisions and I don't do the speeches and I don't do all these things that I do in a lot of other places in my life. Like, I didn't want to talk that day. I was really happy to sit back and drink my glass of wine and watch my husband give the remarks at our wedding, right? Like, so I think it's just the environment, the time in your life, things will change. You will change.
Absolutely.
Your definition of authenticity today is not your definition of authenticity even in a month from now, but it's really responding to the people, the environment, your desire to color or not color your hair.
Exactly.
It's how you respond to all those things in a way that feels really, really good to you, right? And there is always like, as much as we say, like, focus on the internal, we don't live in a fully internal world.
No,
You're going to get feedback. You're going to take comments. And it's paying attention and owning it. Yeah. When you want to sit back and have the glass of wine, or you want to color your hair or not color your hair. That's the thing, is that's whatever comes up for you is like to own it and to, to take ownership of it.
Yeah. When you mentioned that too about Nick and about like, you mentioned, you know, your former relationship and then Nick, I have recently done this exercise, which I think could be extrapolated to a lot of different things to test authenticity and how you feel. Is I literally went through in some of my relationships, like, who am I allowed to be in this relationship? Who do I show up as in this relationship? Who do I not feel okay to be? What are the parts of myself that I put off to the side and just kind of hide from this experience? I think that's something that when you're in the workplace, you probably want to consider it. Like, who am I with this group of coworkers?
Right.
Who do I feel safe to be? And in this case, it could be like, which gifts and strengths do I feel I'm asked to use in this environment? What ones are not okay to show up in this environment? And I think that's a big one, especially like we've talked about. If someone like yourself coming up, and this is what I've experienced, is an obvious leader and good at things like strategy and team building, like those are leadership traits. If you're in a lower level role and you're not able to flex those muscles because it threatens the actual leaders at the table, take note of that, because I think those are strong gifts that, like, you can lead from the middle, you can lead from the bottom, like everybody can lead. If you are being squashed for those gifts, you're not going to feel authentic in that role. And I think that's probably a part of what struggle you had with accounting, not the leadership piece necessarily, but just like not using the gifts that you really knew you needed to use, and finding out, okay, what am I bypassing in this environment? What parts of myself aren't allowed here?
Mm-hmm. And something you said there is so powerful, is how does you showing up for your leaders, right? Like, how does that, can you show up as your most authentic self? Is that acceptable by your leadership table, or is there intimidation or something like that going on? Before I moved to Saskatchewan to take the controller job here in Saskatoon, I'd had opportunities to do it at a few, like I think there's 3 opportunities, same role, different market, but different leader. And it was like picking that leader. And at that point, I don't think I was very aware or connected by any means, but I picked the right leader that I felt really good about, that was aligned with me. And I think that is the most important thing. Like, and this whole like 1 or 2 interviews before you take a job or you join another team, like, to me, that's craziness. Like, you need to be with somebody for a period of time and spend some real time with them to decide if that's a fit for you and for them too. Like, it's just as much
a two-way street, the interview process, for
it
sure.
It really should be. But yeah, like I now really pay attention to people that in my organization today, like, oh, I might work for you one day.
Yeah.
How do you treat me now as somebody who's like nobody to you?
Yeah.
And how do I feel about the interactions we have? What are the things, the conversations that we have? What level of curiosity do you have about me before I'm anybody to you? Like, that to me is more important than anything you say up.
Yeah.
With a mic in front of your, right? Like, to me, like, that doesn't matter.
And I think that is the role of the leader, right? And like you mentioned before, like, a leader can look at the black and white of a business. Organizations have to be pretty cut and dry, black and white in a lot of ways. The policies, the processes, the rules, all of that stuff is important to make people feel on the same page and comfortable and good. But it's the leader's role to understand the impacts of those things and understand the trickle-down effect of those things and how they will hit very individual, nuanced human beings. Yeah. It's not just like a bunch of robots that are learning the policies. It's like individual human beings that are going to react to these things in different ways. Yeah, I think it's the role of the leader to help their team be more authentic.
And as you're saying that, who do you have that's in the wrong role?
Yeah.
And can you fix that?
Yeah. And I think that's part of working towards authenticity, is enjoying the mess of it all. And like, do organizations, and this is a thing that's really hard, do organizations feel okay with lateral moves or pivoting a career or tweaking a job description, or even, God forbid, someone that they've invested money in ending up leaving?
Yeah.
Because, and I've had these conversations with leaders before, it's like, well, I don't really want to invest in this person because I don't know if they're going to stick around. It's like, well, if you don't invest in them, God forbid they do stick around, because now you've got a dud.
Yes.
Right? So like, what is the point in that? Like, allowing people to stretch their wings and find their happiness. Like, I don't see how ever that could be bad for an organization. Because if you're known for an organization that invests in and wants the best out of their employees, like, if someone leaves, you're going to have 5 more waiting to join.
Yeah. Yeah. If you do it right.
If you do it right. Yeah, exactly. So I think that this is something that we're not quite there yet. We haven't shifted the mindset completely to getting away from like, well, no, it's only success if you've been there for 20 years and, you know, you live and die at a place. But I think as we learn to open that up and allow it and be a little vulnerable about the movement that an authentic employee might want in their career history, we can have really amazing and strong and impactful employees in an organization.
Yeah. It's harder to be a leader in those environments because you're having to look at everybody as an individual versus developing a process or policy. Yeah. No different like when we talk about work from home. Yeah. Like all these different issues that are facing the workplace can be solved by having an authentic conversation and communicating and figuring out what actually is needed in a situation, right? Versus like, we're going to lose We're going to lose people who can't relocate. We're going to lose people that need a little bit of flexibility in their jobs, and we're not able to provide it because we're applying a blanket policy to everybody across the board. Yeah. Like those are things that like that is hitting critical mass. Yeah. Organizations like we're not going to have good people to do the work if we can't figure out how to like figure out solutions to these problems.
Yeah. Like for example, you're saying, okay, it's hard as an organization because you have to start looking at people one-on-one. And that is so true. So what is the optimal, number of direct reports for a leader?
Yes.
Are we considering that? And that would be individualized, right? Like, someone who's an extrovert might say like, yeah, give me a group of like 12 direct reports. I'm good with that. I can have those 12 one-on-one relationships. An introvert or someone who is overwhelmed by that number might say, I can only handle 6. And then I can do the job really well because I'll know my team and I'll build them up and I'll get their strengths out and I'll be able to cultivate the relationships that are needed. But it's not usually considered in that way, I don't think. It's like you're stuck with who you're stuck with, as many of them as we need you to do, and you'll just figure it out.
Yeah, what the org structure provides is what you get and figure it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of little things that probably need to shift or be reconsidered in corporate environments before the ideal state exists. It's not going to be anytime soon.
No,
that's fine. But what little things can an employee do? What little things can a leader do? I think we've talked about a lot of them today.
Yeah,
like you can take a lot of steps towards being more authentic and fulfilled at work. You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to start your own thing. I mean, there's a lot of people who do that, and that's great. But I think corporations are going to keep existing. We're going to keep needing them, and we want them to be successful, and we want the people in them to be successful.
Yeah. And the first step, leaders and individuals or team members, is pay attention.
Yeah.
Pay attention. Tap into your authority.
Yes.
Start there,
right? Yeah. It seems easy. It's not, but start there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that was exactly what I wanted, was just to kind of dive into that topic.
Riff on authenticity.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's good.
Thanks for listening to Our Work with Pavan Sidhu, building better businesses and people, one episode at a time. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Pavan, check out the links in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.